Hi, do I need to use this, or can you all hear me without it? I'm really awkward with it. Can you hear me with the camera if I don't? Okay, well, I'll use it just so that this is going to be on public access TV, so you're all going to be famous, apparently, fairly soon. Thanks for joining us tonight at the University of Southern Maine. I'm Julia Edwards. I'm a lecturer in the Political Science Department. I teach mostly international relations focused courses, and a number of my students are in the audience tonight, so thank you for coming. We are thrilled to be able to shed light on a really interesting international legal norm called responsibility to protect. One of my students, Hedtler-Gaudette, has put this entire event together from soup to nuts, so let's start off with please a round of applause for him for doing this. And he recruited his parents to actually provide the lovely food, and I recruited my mother to help me provide the cookies. So it's really a team family effort. So thank you for the food. So tonight it's going to be a fairly informal panel discussion. One of Dylan's responsibilities as part of his independent study with me was to design a way to bring responsibility to protect to the public and really introduce and get individuals aware of the fact that this norm is out there, because it definitely has implications for United States foreign policy, for foreign policy, and human rights in general. And so we really wanted to have a few different viewpoints presented to you, to present to you sort of the complexities and also the just common sense principles of R2P. And so as you'll come to know, it's referred as R2P is responsibility to protect, just a lot shorter way to say it. So we'll have each of the panelists kind of present their opening remarks and sort of their perspective on R2P. Dylan will start and kind of give an overview and sort of delve into what he's been focusing his research on. And then we'll move from there, and the panelists will have a chance to ask questions of each other and then kind of kick it to you guys as the audience. So definitely we want this to be an engaging process. It's not just them talking at you, so please engage, and we'll just be here until we're done. And help yourself to food at any time. We need to get rid of all of it because there's nowhere to take it after this. So, but thank you for coming. And so I'll turn it over to Dylan first to get us started.
Come on there, stay right here. He gets to stay here.
What?
He gets to stay.
Stay right here? Okay.
Hi. So first of all, I would like to thank Julia in kind as well. Julia is literally the reason why I know what the responsibility to protect is. She introduced it to me in a class I took last semester on peacekeeping. And ever since then, R2P for me has just been my driving, my motivating force. It's the thing that gets me up in the morning, just thinking about this and ways to operationalize it and to make it work in the world. So I owe that all to Julia very, very directly. So thank you, Julia. And so first, what I wanted to present in terms of my contribution to this discussion is I think it is equally as important to know what R2P is not as it is to know what R2P is. So that's going to be my main thrust. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history, the evolution of R2P, where it started, what it's done, what it hasn't done, etc. And then I will hand it over after that. So R2P came about because there was a debate going on in the 1990s that had pretty much calcified. Each side of the debate had sort of entrenched itself and hardened, and there was no room for compromise. And what we saw was mass atrocities like Rwanda, Somalia, the former Yugoslavia, Kosovo. So it was this recalcitrance on the part of international actors that really necessitated the formulation of a new way of approaching preventing mass atrocities and dealing with these crimes. So in September of 2000, the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty was formed, and it was tasked with charting a middle course, with devising a way to reconcile the differences between those who advocated for coercive humanitarian intervention and those who were dogmatic adherents to the principle of state sovereignty, meaning state sovereignty cannot be violated at any point or time for any reason. And R2P did that. It in a very comprehensive, holistic, substantive way. The people on the International Commission devised this policy construct, and they presented it in December of 2001, which was a bit of unfortunate timing for obvious reasons. 'Cause as you all know, a few months prior to that was September 11, which completely reoriented and sort of refocused the discourse around international relations. And so R2P went largely sort of unnoticed. It went under the radar for a while in terms of what was going on in the world at that time. There was a little war in Afghanistan going on. There was a war on terror, and those were sort of monopolizing the debate, at least here in America it was. But in 2002 was important. This also sort of flew under the radar, but when the African Union was designing its charter, they incorporated the idea of non-indifference rather than non-intervention, which is to say that they were not going to be indifferent to the needs of African people, of the people within the African Union. And that may not always have worked out in practice, but it was a start. People were actually incorporating R2P language and R2P principles into their foreign policy. So that was important. But the single most important development for R2P, I think, came in 2005 when, at the 60th anniversary United Nations World Summit, there was an outcome document that came out of this summit. And in the outcome document, in paragraphs 138 and 139, there was specific affirmation and adoption of the responsibility to protect as a guiding fundamental norm for the international community. And so that was a big deal for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, many people didn't really view it as the true ratification of R2P, and as we've seen in various crises, it really wasn't. That wasn't all of a sudden the standard operating procedure, but it was an important step. It was voted on unanimously, so that's an important thing to know. Every single state that was in attendance ratified the World Summit Outcomes document. But unfortunately, we saw that whether it was in Darfur in the early 2000s and continuing today, or anywhere else, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, things still kept happening, and that's unfortunate. But that's why we're here today, because we want to make the responsibility to protect the guiding ethos for the international community when it comes to addressing mass atrocity crimes. And just for the sake of clarity, mass atrocity crimes, as far as R2P goes, are defined as genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing. Those are the four big crimes, big issues that R2P is designed to address. So that's what we're talking about when we say the responsibility to protect. And the next big milestone for R2P was probably in 2008, when the great and venerable Kofi Annan intervened in Kenya to halt what surely would have been a catastrophic crisis, in that they had just had an election that was, by all accounts, stolen, and tensions were running high, and it was very likely that violence was going to break out. But Kofi Annan went in with others, but he was kind of the headliner, and they instituted a diplomatic, political, relatively peaceful solution that prevented what would have most likely led to a humanitarian crisis. So that's another one of those things that flew under the radar, because nothing happened. Because R2P worked so well and it was so successful, nobody even really recognizes that R2P was in action there, but it was, definitely was. And that brings us to Libya, which was controversial for many reasons, but in terms of the R2P context, Libya is heralded by some as the sort of shining moment for R2P. This was when the UN Security Council finally stopped twiddling its thumbs and enacted a resolution that implemented R2P in an ominous, serious humanitarian crisis situation. And we saw what happened. Colonel Gaddafi was ousted, and specifically the march on Benghazi was halted, which would also have undoubtedly led to a slaughter. And so proponents like myself were very happy. We were triumphant. We heralded the coming of R2P finally, but we're now seeing, and we've now been seeing, what's going to be termed the Libya effect in Syria, which is to say that certain states, China and Russia and other recalcitrant states, are now a little bit nervous about signing on to UN mandates that they perceive could lead to mission creep and could end up violating the sovereignty of a state or leading to regime change. And that is part of the reason why the Syrian crisis has drawn out for as long as it has, is because of fears and consternation over what happened in Libya, where critics will say that the mandate in Libya was essentially bulldozed from a strict humanitarian civilian protection agenda to one of regime change and one to an offensive war by NATO. So in a strange way, Libya actually hardened people on either side of the R2P debate and didn't really do much to sway people one way or the other, which is unfortunate because the results would seem to be sort of an obvious win for R2P, but things are rarely that cut and dry in international relations. They just don't work that way. Yeah. So that's a basic history of R2P. There's a lot more to it, but if I were to go into every nuance and detail, then we'd be here all night, and you would not get to hear any of these other guys speak, which would not be good. So that was the brief little history. Now I'm going to quickly go over what have been identified as the 5 most important misconceptions about R2P, and these are straight from the man who I have termed the godfather of R2P, and that's Mr. Garrett Evans, who was the co-chair of the International Commission on Intervention in State Sovereignty, and he's been a really, really fierce advocate for R2P ever since then. He's a former Australian ambassador. He's been on numerous councils and commissions in the UN, and he's on the executive board of Dr. Simon Adams' group, the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. So he's an R2P warrior, and I hope to someday join him in that fight. That's my goal. So directly from his book, this is where I'm taking these 5 misconceptions, and I think it's important that as we move forward in this discussion that we all understand what R2P is not. And so the first misconception is R2P is not simply a rebranding or a big leaf for humanitarian intervention. It's not simply trying to promote the same old idea just with new terminology. It's emphatically not that. The second misconception is that in all cases, or at least the extreme ones, that the responsibility to protect always means military intervention. That is absolutely not the case at all. As a matter of fact, there is specific and repetitive, actually, language in the R2P document that states that all non-intrusive, non-coercive policy measures must be explored and exhausted before military action is even contemplated, let alone implemented. So if you're told that R2P is simply humanitarian military intervention rebranded and that it's always going to lead to guns and bombs, it's just not the case. So don't believe it. And in the third misconception, which is another really important one, and it's a little bit different because the people who who often espouse this misconception are actually R2P advocates, but they just don't understand the scope or the intended scope of R2P, and that is R2P is not designed to address the entire range of human security issues. There's just too much out there. For instance, you're not going to invoke R2P to address the effects of global climate change. Now, I think most of us will agree that that is an issue, that is a serious issue that needs redressing, but R2P is not the proper vehicle through which to address that particular issue, nor is it the vehicle through which to address the aftermath of a natural disaster. Again, it's not to say that these issues aren't extremely important and don't cry out for international attention, because they are and they do, but R2P is not the medium to do that. And the fourth misconception, which this is what Garrett Evans termed at the most damaging, but I actually diverge a bit from him on this, so I'm going to put his, and then I'm going to put mine, because obviously I would rather you believe mine than his, but he thinks that the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which is often pointed to by R2P opponents as what will happen if R2P becomes the guiding norm for international relations. We will have a series of 2003 Iraq invasions everywhere. There will be unilateral invasions of countries based on flimsy humanitarian premises. But first of all, it's important to note that the humanitarian motivations for the invasion in Iraq were more of an ex post facto reason that were given it. If you recall, the reason we were told that that intervention was necessary was because of WMD and links to Al-Qaeda. It was only afterwards that the humanitarian concerns were brought up and were put forth as a legitimate reason for intervening, or for, I should say, invading Iraq. So the 2003 Iraq invasion was not an application of R2P, and that is not what we have to look forward to if R2P becomes the fundamental guiding norm for the international community. And the fifth misconception, which I deem to be the most challenging and the most difficult to combat when it's brought up, is that R2P does not only apply to weak and friendless states and not to strong ones. It is not supposed to. That is definitely true. The R2P document clearly states, and all of its precepts and philosophies and tenets state, that it is a universal norm. It is to be applied to everyone, and everyone is to be held accountable to it. Unfortunately, because of the frustrating political machinations of the UN, and more specifically the UN Security Council, it's easy to understand why people would think that, well, R2P is nice, but do you think that R2P is ever going to be applied in, say, the US or any of the P5 members of the UN Security Council? And that's a difficult question to grapple with, because as we see, if you wield a veto on the UN Security Council, then you can almost operate with impunity. And that's a challenge. That's an obstacle that has to be overcome. And to me, that is the single biggest challenge for R2P, is how do we make it truly universal and apply to everybody? So that's what I have for you, and I hope that was informative, and I hope you learned some more from these other people. Thank you.
All right, I would say thank you so much for the organizers and also for the attendance. My name is El-Fadel Arbab. I'm from Sudan, Darfur region, which one is right now is ongoing genocide, ethnic cleansing, crime against humanity, rape, and different torture, and terrible things is happening right now as I'm speaking here in this room. It's happening there. And Sudan, as Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, he's a dictator, and He's just want to do whatever he want to do, and he killed in South Sudan over 2 million and almost 2.5 million people. They've been killed in South Sudan, and that is the result. The South Sudan, they will take their freedom and they will vote for their own new state since last year, July 9th. And in Darfur and in the other marginalized areas as Nuba Mountain, Blue Nile State, and Abyei, and there is so many areas in Sudan, still there is ongoing violence and genocide is going on. For me, simply, I was 12 years old when the government of Sudan and militia called Janjaweed, they come and attack my village. And this is like their own strategic plan, how they will strategize and how they will do this ethnic cleanse. They come at night, everybody's sleeping, even the animals are there, and they come and surround the village in 2 circles. The first circle, they taking their guns and machetes. The second circle, they riding on horse and camels. And that, it will be like the government air forces will come above the village and throw the rockets down. When the houses start burning or the hut, then the people start running. They run to go to the wood and hide or through the mountains. And then there is some people, either the Janjaweed militia or the government of Sudan, their job to go inside the street, run on the street, and get the people and put them in the hut or in the houses and put them in and burn them alive. They're doing 2 things for one reason. Burning people alive, and there is no birth certificate, that they could kill as much they want, and they know that the justice will follow them one day. When the justice follow them, they will say, okay, we didn't kill that much. And they will say, yeah, you guys killed even more than this. And they will say, okay, what's your evidence? Bring the evidence. And then if you go back, there is no evidence, there is no birth certificate, there is no ID, there is no passport, there is nothing, that they doing burning people alive, and there is no birth certificate. They doing that for that reason. And also they doing creating a militia called Janjaweed. When the justice come after them, they will blame the Janjaweed. They will say, hey, look, those are the Janjaweed militia. They go and do this genocide. And the Janjaweed will say, look, we are just militia. This is the government of Sudan. They've been funding us, giving us everything, and they want to play that dirty games there to the justice. And the way they kill, if you didn't burn inside the house, you come on running out, the first circle waiting for you. You want to run, you get bullet shot, run for a while, end up dead. You are a kid, you get machete, you run for a while. And when any kid, they come running, they're saying for the kids, they don't want to waste even 1 bullet. They will save the bullets for those whom they want to escape the village. So they will just cut the head. The head will fall in that place, but the body will run without no head for a while and just fall. And for the women and the girls, they use rape as a weapon of war. Because when they rape one woman or girl in my community, that whole entire community or that family breaks apart and is not coming back. And that they want to use that to break a family first. And a lot of them, because of that, committing a suicide or run away, go somewhere, nobody finds them. And that's really breaking our heart. And you know, it's just very difficult. And for the moms, when they run and they having the babies in their arm running, they want to escape the village, they take the babies from them. Kill the babies or throw them in the fire or kill them and just put them in the ground, put a lot of grass on top of them and gasoline and mash and burn them alive. So, and also when the moms, they have babies, they run after them and they're saying 100% that baby will be a boy. They cut the belly Mom will die, baby will die. Because they saying that baby will be a boy, will raise, will learn the history, will against them in the future. So we lost so many women and girls by that way, and the kids, those are the most, we lost them there. And it's just terrible. And also they kind of, the girls and women, they cut their breasts because they're saying, if we let you go, you will find some kids, their parents being died and they hiding under the dead bodies. You could take those kids and feed them from your breast, so they cutting that breast by that way. And there is so many things happening. And now by International Criminal Court, that the number they have, estimate number, 400,000 people or 300,000 people, that's the estimate they have. But for me, someone from Darfur, the number even is double, because there is no evidence that to prove to them. And even you go to the International Criminal Court or whatever who's taking that report, they will say, we need something that you will show you have a family or brothers or sisters, they being killed. We need anything to show. If you don't have, we are very sorry. So, and it's really very difficult. It's very difficult. I escaped the genocide. I being burned in the house. I get burnt in my head, my face, part of my body is get burnt as a child, 12 years old. But I was very lucky because of our elders' stories that we don't have no school and we just learn from their stories. That is like for us, school and education. So that story saved my life to escape and go between town to town, trees to the mountains, go to different towns and cities. I go to capital of Sudan, it was even worse. It's not easy there, you will find a food or water or medicine. And the hope was to go there to find my parents. I go there, it was even worse. The government chasing the kids. They saying, hey, look, you guys coming here to make our city dirty. Take the kids, slave them when they grow up 16, 17, drag them, return them back to kill their own parents, their own community people. And I escaped from there, and we find a way how to go to Egypt. We go to Egypt, and we wait there for almost 4 years and a half. We will get a visa, and we get a visa, and we come here to United States to start a new life. And I really, when I come here, all these images and everything I see in my life, that is not let me to sleep or eat or drink, and my body have a lot of pain. So I start reaching out, telling my story. When I tell my story, that is really, for me personally, helped me. And I feel like all the pain I have, like I could feel like it's going away from me. And that's what I start my activism as a genocide survivor and child slavery in capital of Sudan, Khartoum. And it's really, for me today, I really feel that we want to work more that to make a difference. And instead of the role of the United Nations in Sudan, that since 2003, when General Colin Powell and Kofi Annan, they went to Chad, and they go to Sudan, and they go to South Sudan, and they bring their report. President Bush, he announced it the U.S. Congress, Darfur as a genocide. But since then, they didn't do that much to take action to stop the killing and die. And the United Nations, they get in, and United Nations, they have the peacekeepers in the ground. There is African peacekeeper in the ground. There is Cement Arab League peacekeepers in the ground. But their mandate is not strong enough, even to protect their self. That's why the militia, Janjaweed, and the government of Sudan, they come and attack, kill them, and kill the innocent, and rape them, and run and go. And we told them, you guys have to change this mandate thing. You guys have to change it. We need to have a strong mandate that if the bad people come to you, you protect yourself first. Second, you have to be in between to protect the innocent people, as UN mentioned say that protect the innocent people, separate them from the bad people, give them protection, food and water, medicine, and basic education. That is like the basic thing. But still they are there. Oh, we have to collect the evidence. We have to do that. And all that we have to process. And the government is telling them what to do. And it's really, if they go somewhere, the government attacks them and kill and all that. And it's really very hard. For now, it's almost 8 years, the genocide ongoing. And the process is really going very slow, but I really appreciate they trying to, but the government of Sudan, they block all the humanitarian organization or kick them out. So tells them, you go here, if you go here, you will be responsible. So it's really, they make it very complicated. And now last week or 2 weeks ago, there is a bad war between South and North. And that is really very difficult, and we just hear that in the news that the United Nations Secretary called the Salva Kiir that they will pull out the troops from the border, and that areas is belong to the South. Historically, we as a Sudanese people, we know, but for some case, like pull the troops out, they pull it, but still the government of Sudan ignores. In daily basis, they go attack and kill, and nobody saying anything about it. But we hope that we have to come to the humanity level first, and the politics will be after the humanity. And that's where I'm here now. And I don't know, I have more time, or we could play that.
But you're better than the video, so we're going to pass it to Simon.
Okay, you go ahead. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so I get the unenviable task of speaking after that. So I should introduce myself. My name's Simon, and I'm the executive director of the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect in New York. And I hope you can understand my accent. I come from Brooklyn, so I'm a bit difficult to understand. I live in Brooklyn, I should say. And the Global Center, I guess, is a kind of a bit of a strange organization. We were actually set up by Kofi Annan and a number of leaders of the international human rights movement, and also by a number of friendly governments and some major NGO partners, Human Rights Watch and the International Crisis Group most particularly. And our role is to sort of work at the United Nations with member states to try and improve their response to issues precisely like what you've just been hearing about regarding Darfur, to carry out advocacy with them and to generally advance the responsibility to protect. So I wanted to kind of say a few things today, and I guess, by far the most catastrophic decision in the United Nations' entire history was not the result of overzealousness and action, but of inaction. In fact, two events, Rwanda in 1994 and Srebrenica in 1995. And if anything positive came out of those tragedies, or if we just look at those tragedies for a second, they showed that despite the Genocide Convention, despite everything that happened in the Holocaust, when there was a genocide in Srebrenica in 1995 in the heart of Europe, the United Nations and the international community was shown to be absolutely impotent in the face of that. And the year before, of course, in Rwanda, 800,000 people killed in a 100-day period in one of the quickest and bloodiest slaughters in human history, and the international community did nothing. I've had the opportunity to work in Rwanda twice, and in the work that I do now, not a day goes past when I don't think back to the lessons that I learned in the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide. So out of that, if anything positive did come out of that, it was kind of the emergence of this notion of sovereignty as responsibility, and this idea that there must be a way, if we can't fix all the problems in the world, surely we can fix our response to these most conscious, shocking crimes that exist, the four mass atrocity crimes which were mentioned by Dylan. And that's what precisely was endorsed in 2005 at the World Summit, which I guess, for UN events is a pretty significant thing. And I think, I can't remember who, I think it was Martin Gilbert, the historian, later described it as the most significant change in attitudes to sovereignty in 350 years. I think he was probably understating it, if anything, because for the first time in human history, it really violated one of the central precepts since the Treaty of Westphalia, which is that there are things that are the responsibility of all of us as human beings to act when these most conscience-shocking crimes happen. That there is something more important than national sovereignty, and that's our common humanity. And I think that's a very good place to start. The problem, of course, was actually making that a reality, and that's where it gets a whole lot trickier, and that's why the Global Centre was essentially set up. So I'm not going to go over the potted history. I think Dylan gave a very good account of where things have gone, but let me just raise, I guess, a couple of issues. I guess, my starting point would be that for all its ups and downs, R2P is here to stay as an international norm, and certainly is here to stay in terms of its position in the UN. And I think there's a lot of evidence of that, but let me just concentrate on a couple of things. 2011 was a huge year for the responsibility to protect. And you can track it in all kinds of different ways, but I'll just give you one, which was in the period between 2005 and the start of 2011, those words, the responsibility to protect or this emerging norm, was used in 6 major resolutions or statements of the United Nations Security Council or the Human Rights Council. It was used in 6 major resolutions of the Security Council in 2011 alone. So you kind of see this massive spike. That's just the Security Council. That's not counting what happened at the Human Rights Commission and what happened in other major parts of the UN last year. You look at those resolutions around the situation in Libya, 2 resolutions, 1973, 1975, which very clearly used responsibility to protect language and led to the intervention there. Around the situation in Cote d'Ivoire, resolution 1975, around South Sudan, around the situation in the DRC and preventive diplomacy. So there was this huge and massive leap. And I think what has to be said is, if we had the responsibility to protect in 1994, we might have been able to save 800,000 lives. There's no guarantee of that. But certainly R2P enables us the possibility to mobilize within the United Nations, to mobilize governments in ways which wasn't possible previously. And R2P, I say this with, this is a slightly contentious thing to say, R2P saved lives in Libya last year. I mean, Dylan referred to, the Gaddafi's troops bearing down on Benghazi. And there was that moment, and I can say this because we were involved in this at the time, of advocacy at the Security Council, of looking at the information that was coming, and was clear that there was going to be something horrific, something that would be evocative of Srebrenica. And by an irony of history, one of the members of the Security Council last year was Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the ambassador there, I remember, and he said it several times publicly, that played very much in his mind, looking at this. A town of several 100,000 people, troops bearing down on it. Somebody, I don't want to get into the whole crazy Gaddafi thing, but somebody who had a history and had intent, and who was saying, I'm coming to your city to cleanse it door by door. There will be rivers of blood when I get there. And I think it was right to take him at his word, and it was right to respond the way in which the international community did. But I think the problem after Libya, of course, is, one of the things that Dylan's mentioned, is the kind of conflation of R2P with military intervention, that R2P is only about military intervention. That's been a big part of the discussion and the debate around Syria. Whereas I would say in contradiction of that, I guess, is that R2P is primarily a preventive doctrine. It's primarily about working with states to help them uphold their responsibility to protect. Secondly, it's about the international community doing what it can to work with those countries, and only in the most serious cases, and to use the language of paragraphs 138, 139 of the World Summit document, which I know everybody recites every day to themselves and thinks about at night. Maybe Dylan does, actually. Maybe he does. It's about, when a state is manifestly failing to, or is unwilling or unable to uphold its responsibility to protect, that we then look at coercive measures. And those coercive measures, remembering this is the UN that we're talking about, can, go from everything from kind of a slap on the wrist, a diplomatic slap on the wrist, to economic sanctions, to diplomatic isolation, and then ultimately, at the extreme end of that, military intervention. And I think R2P has played a really positive role. And again, it's always the counterfactuals are difficult. But if you look at Kenya, if you look at Guinea in 2010, if you look at the situation in Libya, we've still got a lot of rebuilding to do in Libya. But if you look at, and I'm very worried by the government's most recent laws around impunity for war crimes committed on the anti-Gaddafi side in the uprising, which was just passed yesterday. But if you look at Cote d'Ivoire, if you look at South Sudan, where there's struggling to uphold its responsibility to protect with regards to ethnic violence in Jonglei, if you look at the war between South Sudan and Sudan, the situation in Darfur, R2P can, in these situations, hopefully provide a frame to bring people together and to mobilize real action. I'm not for one second pretending that it can solve everything magically. It's not a panacea that can just be sprinkled on a political situation. But I think it's still the best hope we have to address these sorts of things. And in that, I'll say something very quickly, if I could, about Syria. You know, a lot of people have talked about the Libya effect or the backlash, and of course, in the aftermath of Libya, the Russians and the Chinese very specifically said, you know, this is about what happened in Libya. This is about exceeding mandates. We don't want to see sanctions because sanctions are a slippery slope to F-16s and cruise missiles in Syria. And I think the truth of the situation is that the Russian and Chinese veto on the 4th of February and the 4th of October the previous year were about allies, arms, and power, and about nothing other than that. And all their attempts to deflect it onto being about Libya or to being about the responsibility to protect were just that, an attempt to deflect it away from the core issues of their deep, particularly the Russians I'm talking about, their deep ties with the Syrian regime. Having said that, I think, you know, the international community, given the anachronistic structure of the Security Council, is doing what it can to try and respond to Syria. A number of states have put bilateral sanctions in place. There's, of course, a lot more going on. The Annan mission, and Kofi Annan is as I said, not only one of our founders, but is a patron of the center. But I think even there, a growing number of states are realizing that if the Annan mission fails, this may be the last gasp for any kind of diplomatic possibilities or peaceful solutions to the situation in Syria. Let me just say, I guess I don't want to take up too much time, and I'd rather subject myself to interrogation than sort of just speak at length, assuming that you can been able to understand what I've said with my thick Brooklyn accent. But let me just say a couple of things maybe by way of kind of summing up, which is, I think, you know, and I think Dylan characterized it quite well. In the 1990s, you had that kind of, over here you had the sovereignty nuts, and over here you had the people talking about humanitarian intervention, and there was kind of a Chinese wall between the two of them that they could not meet. And I think R2P was precisely to talk about the fact that it's not about anybody's right to intervene anywhere. It's not about any rights of one nation to do to another nation or do to another people, anything. It's about responsibilities of human beings as human beings, and the responsibility of the international community and the United Nations to live up to the promise of what it's supposed to do. And I think in that regard, with regards to the responsibility to protect, we've actually won the battle of ideas. And I'll give you, by way of a kind of not an especially good example, but I'll give you an example of that, which was, you know, I was watching the opening of the General Assembly last year, and we track who mentions the responsibility to protect in their speeches and so forth, and it's kind of this scale that goes up each year with the number of people who mention it. But there were a few surprises last year, and the two biggest were, you know, first of all, when President Robert Mugabe, the unelected president of Zimbabwe, came out and said that he was opposed to the misapplication of the responsibility to protect in Libya, which I presume means he's for the correct application of the responsibility to protect elsewhere, but used the language. And the other one was the Syrian foreign minister, who came out and in a very defensive way said, Syria is upholding its responsibility to protect. Don't keep criticizing us about this. And I thought it was a lie, but it was a very backhanded compliment to the norm as well, that even these offending states, even these dictators feel now a need to use the language and to frame their responses to the international community's criticisms in a particular kind of way. And I think there's been some real positives over the last year as well, besides the specific incidents I've mentioned. The Centre's been involved in an initiative with the governments of Costa Rica and Denmark and Ghana and Australia in launching something called R2P focal points, who are senior government officials appointed within governments to create a network of people who can not only convene at a senior level within the government, but can mobilize around specific situations and join up with each other across borders. The United States has appointed a focal point, I'm very happy to say, as have a number of other governments. And of course, I was in Washington on the 23rd, I think it was, of April, when President Obama announced the establishment of the Atrocities Prevention Board from the United States government. And we were able, in a very modest way, in a very quiet way, to have input into the establishment of the APB and some of the recommendations that have come out of it. And I think it's really set the benchmark for other governments around the world in terms of recognizing global responsibilities. So, the challenge, I think, now is, the debate is not whether a responsibility to protect exists, but how it should be meaningfully implemented. And again, I was at a meeting, last year at the opening of the General Assembly with 14 foreign ministers. We convene a ministerial meeting each year, and the Secretary General of the United Nations was 2 people down from me, so he's where you were sitting, Dylan. And he was speaking to this group, and he said, nobody in the world challenges the responsibility to protect anymore. And I kind of had one of those Scooby-Doo moments where you're like, huh? I can think of a few. But what he said is, no, they don't argue with the concept. There's acceptance of the concept. What we fight about now is implementation, and that's a far healthier argument to have, and I agree with him. Because we can argue about how and where and in what way R2P should be implemented in a specific context. And that's a much more meaningful debate than having some kind of abstract philosophical discussion about whether, about state sovereignty or about whether mass atrocity crimes should be opposed by people around the world. So, right now, and again, it was a very powerful testimony there, but, is this concept relevant? Well, I think right now it's a life or death issue for people in the Kivus and the DRC, for people in South Kordofan and Blue Nile and Darfur and Abyei in Sudan. It's a life or death issue for people in Syria. It's a life or death issue for people in a number of different places around the world. And I think, to make it real and meaningful in the future, it's going to rely, as always, not only on institutional capacity, and that's part of, I guess, my center's role, but on political will at the United Nations and beyond. The will to engage with all 3 pillars of the responsibility to protect, the will to protect populations wherever they may be in the world, and to end the paralysis of inaction. Because I think at the end of the day, R2P stands for an absolute end to impunity, to inaction and injustice. It means nothing more than that, but it certainly should never mean nothing less than that either. I'll leave it there. So,
Simon. I got a feeling I'm one of the strangers in the room today, and I thought I would just do a brief introduction and then discuss my view of R2P, and then close with an appeal to each of you to put me out of business as a soldier. My name is Colonel Jack Mosher. I grew up here in Maine in a very small town of Burnham, just north of Waterville. My father was a math teacher. My mom was a stay-at-home mother. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. And I went to MCI in Pittsfield, the University of Maine, where I was commissioned as an officer in the infantry. I double majored in English and broadcasting production. So I enjoyed reading your papers, Dylan, with a scrutinous eye, and also listening to your thesis today. It was very nice. Thank you for sharing that. And then I went off into the world, having left the state of Maine for the first time to go to airborne school at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. This was my first international experience, which it was at the time. Trust me, they have red dirt down. That was my first impression, flying over in the plane going, wow. In fact, the first 6 times I flew in a plane, I only landed one of them. So, and you have to jump out of the plane to go to airborne school. You get the whole point. But my point is that I went on to get master's degrees in education from the University of Southern Maine here, and in international strategic studies at the United States Army War College later. I've served for 25 years as an operations officer and as a commander at every level from platoon leader to brigade command, and have been around a significant portion of this globe seeing what humanity has to offer. And I've seen a lot. And 2003 and 4, I found myself in Afghanistan, living in the indigenous population there in northern and western and southern Afghanistan, working with the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, the State Department, and of course a lot of non-government organizations trying to put the country back together after the fall of the Taliban and the deconstruction of the Northern Alliance at the time. I learned an awful lot about stabilization, peacekeeping, nation building, and all those buzzwords that we like to use. And I'll share some of those observations with you, maybe during the question and answer period. But my resounding impression at the time was that the military brings a tremendous amount of capability into any theater of operations. They are excellent communicators, they have command and control functions, logisticians, operations, stability, but they're a military. That's the problem. You see, most of these situations come at the hands of a military situation. So you come into these populations as a military officer, and they don't want to see you. They don't care if you're Taliban. They don't care if you're Northern Alliance. They don't care if you're NATO. They don't care if you're American. They don't want bullets flying up and down their streets anymore. And the resource allocation at the time, and at the time, if you can imagine this, there were 8,000 soldiers in the entire country. What are there now? 100,000? I lost track. I mean, that just shows you mission creep and how vast some of these operations grow in 10 years. I can't believe it's been 10 years now. You know that there's a time clock in Afghanistan, historically speaking. What I would do is I would work with the local shuras and some incredibly talented and smart and dedicated people who didn't have body armor walking around with me to put these regions back together, building schools, wells, advocating human rights causes, rights for women, voting. We were doing the Loya Jirga then. We were doing the first elections. And I carried with me bricks of money, ammo cans of cash, U.S. greenbacks, $100,000 in cash at a time to pay for this because there was no contracting system then. So we would literally be walking around with boxes of cash, and we would pay, out to build a school or build a well or build a road or a building, and we would take a handwritten, receipt like this, $50,000. And I would take that back to Kabul and I would turn it in, and that would be the accountability system for that $50,000. Written, of course, in Dari. Nobody knew how to read Dari. I could have just gone, okay. It's my contribution to the University of Southern Maine today,
The center's always looking for donations.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. My point is that the military, and I'll answer all of your questions from my heart when it comes to military. The point is that by the time we get there, it's often too late. I read with great interest Dylan's papers, and I shared them with my staff in Augusta, which sparked wild and enthusiastic debate over what was in there. And, most of my staff there, they're majors, they're captains, they're sergeants, many have master's degrees. Almost all of them have gone to college, and they're very passionate about being soldiers, but they're more passionate about peace. Nobody appreciates peace. I shouldn't say nobody. Soldiers appreciate peace. They do. The idea that soldiers want to go out and find a place to fight is an absolute myth. It's not true. Some, of course, you can point to that want to do that, but by the time you've left your home for the third, fourth, fifth time, it gets a little old if there was any nostalgic romanticism left in that type of a viewpoint. And of course, you do get to see some pretty difficult things out there. We see that in our current generation of soldiers and how they're dealing with it. Probably the best application of military when it comes to this question and this discussion is what I call the Renfro triangle. And if you imagine an equilateral triangle, the base being security. This is fair, just security where people aren't killing each other. Very base. We're not talking about happiness here. We're not talking about, rivers of chocolate and rainbow gumdrop smiles or anything. We're talking about simple base stability. The left leg would be opportunity. This is just government, a system of laws, a post office, a school system that welcomes boys and girls, opportunity that based on how hard they work, not what family they come from or what religion they come from or what region they come from, they have an opportunity to be something based on their own self-actualization, how hard they want to work. The other leg, in equal measure, as I said, would be resources. And you can have stability, you can have opportunity, but if people are starving to death, it won't work. And the important part of that iron triangle, I've seen it repeated over and over again, is trying to bring that together and then quickly back out of the situation as a military officer. I was disheartened how many times, just because I was sitting in the room with a uniform on, in fact, I didn't wear a uniform most of the time that I was there, but when I did have my uniform on, people would automatically turn to me for a solution when there are much more learned people in the room than I. And as I said, really, really appreciated and learned the value of peacemakers, not peacekeepers or stabilization forces, the people that were there and doing the day-to-day, unglamorous, difficult work of that nobody's really ever going to see. It's not going to be on CNN probably. They're not going to get a medal for it. They're not going to get a Bronze Star, but they're going to sit there and they're going to nug out that agreement, that school, that cooperative relationship to be able to move through the next day in a peaceful manner and just building the peace of the region. I do believe that, in this dark forest of the human experience, there is a narrow and rocky trail between good and evil. And I put it in terms of good and evil because many of the things that I have seen, as well as the members of the panel up here, are things that would never happen in nature. Animals wouldn't do to each other what some people do to each other. And that tenuous pathway is tended and blazed, carved out of this wilderness by people with really great spirits, people who have optimism and perseverance, and they come from places like this. People have a passion for it, and I like to sit in the back of the room during these thesis defenses and hear people pounding on the podium, about how they feel about that and why they're like that. Because you would say, well, soldiers, these are these kind of robotic, blind faith in their country people. And of course, we do have great faith in our country and our Constitution, all of that. But we're very judgmental as well when it comes to the things that we do, And we like to see people out there speaking their mind. That's why we fight. I drive every day across the Waterville-Winslow Bridge on Sunday. I like to go running my marathon runner. And the Maine Peace Action Committee is out there with their signs, banging on their drums, honk for peace. And I always honk, toot, and wave to them, because that's an important part of our checks and balances in our country. And I just, as I said, it's an appeal that this program and programs like it around the country that stem largely from our universities are a very important part of that voice, not just in the USM or in Maine or in America, but everywhere you go in the world. So I would like to be able to retire in about 5 years. and go sell my lobsters. I have a lobster business. And be able to walk away from a more peaceful world because of initiatives like R2P. And as imperfect as it may be in its application, it's still a evolutionary step forward in the consciousness of humanity, that peace is possible and attainable, and a international voice is the way to get there. So I guess I'll stop talking there and answer any questions that you might have. I'm probably going to be the buzzkill in the room for a lot of these discussions, but I promise to answer truthfully and from my heart and from a kind of a sterile military perspective, if that's okay.
Well, thank you so much. I figure that we could kind of open it up to the four of you to kind of ask questions across each other and maybe stimulate some thinking for the audience, and then we can open it up. Obviously, audience guests, if you have things to add or questions to throw in at any time, that's great. And I'll kind of let the panel kind of govern themselves. I'm all about individual sovereignty, so do what you need to do, but I'll just, if things get out of hand, I'll step in, but I don't think that that's going to happen. So, so I guess if any of you have questions for each other or comments to make on what you've heard from your fellow panelists, I'll leave it to you guys to pass the mic and have at it. So, thanks.
Dylan has a question.
Thank you. This is just a general question to my panelists. I'm wondering, how relevant do you think the Westphalian sort of nation-state construct is still to this, in this incredibly globalized, interdependent world? I'm wondering if are we operating on a completely obsolete framework, like an idea, a conceptualization of what it is to be a country, or is it even relevant anymore, or pertinent, I guess? So I'd like to.
Who wants it?
You take it.
I guess Dylan wasn't paying attention when I said we've moved beyond abstract debates to specific implementation. But no, I think we, these ideas seem contradictory, but they're not. I mean, we live in a world that's still ultimately made up of states, and those states have sovereignty and they have power, and whether we accept them or not, that's just the way that the world works, and that's what we have to relate to. But I think, in a way, the notion that states have total sovereignty, and that you can kind of pull the curtains, close the door, and lock it, and then whatever you do within there is your own business, which is very much a kind of a concept of the 17th or of the 18th century, should not be, and I think is not, a reality of the 21st century. There are loads of different ways. There's lots of different ways and means in which people and nations are interacting with each other every day, and an increasingly, we use the word globalization, and it's an imperfect term, but in a globalized world. And I think the global movement for human rights and the idea that there is such a thing as universal human rights is a very strong one and is a very good one. And I think, to follow on from what you said, this is the next step. It doesn't diminish any nation's sovereignty. It doesn't diminish the right or the power or the strength of any community or any nation in the world, but is really about exactly what it says, a responsibility for all of us to protect one another as human beings. But thanks for the question. I think there's a guy back. So.
Any questions from the audience? Yeah, if you could just speak very loudly.
United States intervention in foreign government or foreign nation. because there's a lot of history there. But there's nothing, no one act. United Nations doesn't act. United States, for which they should even impose no-fly zone within the area. They cannot do that. But still, people done it. So in this case, how can we get help from you guys like the R2P?
Please try to summarize the question for the video.
Okay. The question was about, first of all, was about how R2P applies to who has the responsibility. Is it individual nations? Is it the United Nations? Is it all of those things? And secondly, the question was about the ongoing crimes in Sudan and in South Sudan or on the border region, and what the world is doing about it, and the whole issue of interests in all of this. And I guess since I've introduced the question, I guess I'm partially compelled to respond to it. Let me work in reverse order. Let me say straight out that not enough has been done in Sudan. I think the government in the Republic of Sudan is a criminal government. The president has been indicted for war crimes and genocide in Darfur. I think there was a correct indictment, and I look forward to the day of seeing him in handcuffs in The Hague, being held accountable for what he's done. And that will be a happy day. So let me say that at the outset. But I don't think it's the case that the United Nations has done nothing. And there's currently 3 peacekeeping missions in Sudan, in Darfur and in the Abyei region, and more generally. So not enough has been done, but I think the international community is struggling again, as it does in these particular issues, with divided interests. We have particular powers who have sided with the Sudanese regime or attempted to protect the Sudanese regime, and that's a huge problem. I think the resolution that was passed yesterday or the day before on South Sudan and Sudan at the UN Security Council, and calling on both governments to refrain from incitement to withdraw their troops from the contested border region, it was a good resolution, but I think what we really need is to go back to the comprehensive peace agreement that was signed between the two countries, to go back to the border issues which need to be resolved, and to not try and avoid, as the international community has, I think, the ongoing contested issues of what to do about the disputed regions, Blue Nile, South Kordofan, Abyei, where people have a strong identification with the South, but are now politically marooned within what is the Republic of Sudan. And I think what the international community has tried to do in Sudan is to look at it as individual issues. Darfur, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, Abyei, and then now the border dispute between Sudan and South Sudan. Whereas there's something that all of these problems have in common, and it's the government of Sudan. And I think we need a comprehensive solution which goes back and looks at the whole thing in its totality. I've already spoken for too long, but let me just say, by way of kind of answering the other part of the question, all governments have a responsibility to protect their own people, and every member of the international community of states, as agreed at the World Summit, has a responsibility to protect as well. I think, interest is what happens in global politics, but it's not what always happens, and I'll give you one very quick example. And as you can probably tell from my accent, I don't normally find myself in the position of being a propagandist of the State Department of the United States of America. But for example, this year, at the end of last year, the U.S. government announced it was sending 100 special forces to Central Africa to assist in the apprehension of Joseph Kony, another man who deserves to be in handcuffs and at The Hague. 100 U.S. soldiers sent to a part of the world that I say, and I hope no insult to the Americans in the room, that most Americans don't even know, where this part of the world is, Central African Republic and some of the areas where Joseph Kony is hiding. It's an election year. If, God forbid, some or one or more of those soldiers loses their lives in the pursuit of Joseph Kony, I can't see how there's any interest in it for President Obama at all, other than a more general commitment to the idea that a country like the United States has a moral responsibility to confront mass atrocity crimes where they occur in the world, and if it has the potential to do something about it, that it should. I think that's a very positive thing, and I just wish that actually more countries would follow that example. Other people might want to.
Sure, and I just want you to know that I hold my own opinions, and meaning that I'm going to tell you what I think about it. I'm not in my uniform now, and I don't mean to differ with Simon on this, but 100 Special Forces soldiers is a very easy investment in a perception of engagement in Africa. Right now, the United States is building an entire combatant command in Africa called AFRICOM, and that is almost entirely designed to advance the United States Machiavellian interests in Africa. So you can't, divorce yourself from African interests when it comes to this sort of a thing without kind of anteing up. That's a pretty small ante given the need that's been there for a long time now. And the state of Special Forces soldiers it's a very kind of cloaked environment by nature of their operations. There's not a lot of accountability associated with it. And we talk about the Somalia situation, where we did have a bunch of Rangers get killed there. Some of my soldiers were there for that. This is a little bit different than that. You talk about rules of engagement and span of operations and the training capacity that they're there for. I'm not understating the value of the effort, but it's a pretty safe bet for President Obama to send 100 guys there without any transparency, any description of operations, any level of proof of success, or even what their level of risk is in being there. Does that make sense to people from a different viewpoint? And I don't mean, again, to understate the value of having our soldiers there, because, half a life is showing up, right? But, I would like to have seen maybe a brigade combat team show up with logistics, with medicine, with military police, with governance teams and things like that, that would have been a more significant and more overt demonstration of our commitment to that region, given our vital national interests. We haven't talked a lot about that yet. Vital national interest is what gets us there. From a strictly sterile military perspective, the Congress, the American people want to see why our soldiers and our people, who all come from our families, why we're expending blood and treasure in a region. There's a litmus test there. And I'm not sure if that's a great an answer for you, but as I said, Simon is correct in that we did send soldiers there. I would have liked to have seen more of an effort, again, from an international perspective, in a position of leadership as one of those countries.
My name is Mohammed. This is a question for the panel. Before I ask my question, I just wanted to say that I'm an advocate for R2P, and I hope that it continues to evolve and become a norm in the international community. This question pertains to Libya. I feel there's a misconception that this was a major stride for R2P in the region. And Simon mentioned how one of the instances was Gaddafi had his troops bearing down on Benghazi. And R2P and the mandate there stopped that from happening. But I don't see why there was action in Libya before there was action in Sudan, in Darfur, in South Sudan, where these occurrences happen almost on a daily basis. So my question is, why was there action in Libya before Sudan, before Democratic Republic of Congo, before many places where mass atrocities are committed and are basically desensitized because it's just a normal occurrence.
Who wants it?
Want me to take a crack at that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for the question, Mohammed. I would say, just from my personal perspective, and I've done a significant amount of reading on the Libya case. I had to write a case study on the the Libyan intervention, and I think you're right to express, I'm going to characterize that as outrage. Outrage that Libya was intervened. There was an intervention in Libya before there was an intervention in the DRC or in Sudan or in any other place, but we have to sort of take victories where we can get them in the current paradigm, like because the mandate was in place in Libya, we did prevent what could have very easily led to a genocide or crimes against humanity or war crimes. So it was helpful in that respect. And my personal view on the reason why that happened is because Libya, in terms of its geographical location, is pretty much in NATO's backyard, I guess is probably a better way to say it, in NATO's backyard. So there was more of a sort of an immediate interest for NATO and NATO members in that particular conflict. And it's sad that it has to come down to those sorts of considerations, I think, because the idea of R2P is to eventually render those selfish motivations like irrelevant. When genocide or crimes against humanity or war crimes or ethnic cleansing are occurring, they need to be stopped regardless of where they're located geographically or who it is that is being subjected to those horrible atrocities. It just needs to be stopped. And you're right that there are many crises on a daily basis that call out for the application of R2P, and I think everyone on this panel would agree with you. And if we had fiat power, we would do that. But we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good at this point in the evolution of R2P. So when there's an opportunity to invoke it and to apply it, then we have to take that opportunity wherever it comes up.
No, I think that last point is the crucial one. Just because we can't do everything that we should doesn't mean that we shouldn't do what we can. And I'd go back to my earlier point about institutional capacity and political will, and both of which are absolutely essential, I think, in these cases. And of course, in my the comments I made earlier, I made a point of saying that R2Ps are primarily a preventive doctrine, and yet we're spending a lot of time here talking about the pointy end of the stick, which is the extreme cases where military action becomes necessary. But given that we are talking about, if you look at the Gaddafi case, there were a couple of very crucial factors. One was the location, which was mentioned, hugely important. Logistical issues and institutional capacity are enormously important. It's the first thing. Second thing is no allies. Gaddafi had successfully alienated pretty much everybody in the world, including every one of both the Arab League and even within the African Union, where he had some political attraction, he had managed to alienate pretty much everybody. And thirdly, not only was that true, but even more importantly, the Arab League and the AU were both knocking on the door of the Security Council saying that action needed to happen. And increasingly, the cases of the Security Council is that they tend to defer to regional organizations in most cases, and you had, in this case, both of them knocking on the door. That's very, very different. I don't think DRC is a good comparison. Right now, MONUSCO, which is the UN operation in the DRC, has about 19,000 troops in the eastern DRC. So there actually is pretty large-scale international action there. The DRC is one of the most intractable and one of the most tragic situations in the world. We don't actually know how many people have died in the DRC, but it seems like somewhere around 3.5 million since 1997 is a fairly safe estimate. And in fact, over the last 2 weeks, the situation in the DRC has taken a very bad turn for the worse. I think but if you compare it to Darfur, and I'm not for a moment saying that there shouldn't have been international action in Darfur or that there shouldn't have been more forceful action with regards to Sudan. But I know what those who didn't want to see action in that part of the world would say: location, allies, and the role of the regional organizations. And if you look at those three factors and you compare it to the Libya case, Sudan is immediately different on all three of those grounds. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that organizations like mine don't continue to do advocacy around those kinds of issues, but I think it helps explain why we're in the situation we are at the moment with regard to Sudan. Do you want to?
I would just, I would absolutely agree with that. If you look at Libya as a case study, it was an easy one for the reasons that Simon articulated. I mean, if you're being made fun of on Saturday Night Live on a nightly basis, you're probably ripe for the taking, you know. And if you remember how, I mean, Muammar Gaddafi was a laughable character. He wasn't, I understand that, but you're talking about a very easy polarizing character. His isolation is absolutely correct. He had no friends. And if you look at the very tepid, you know, kind of viewpoint of statements around the initial demonstrations, and as that gained momentum and gained more certainty as to what the outcome might be, you saw the proportional response of the international community following that, not leading it. And I would have liked to, again, have seen a more of a leadership role in bringing that, you know, as a preventive means. And I just think it was a fairly easy one compared to some of these other situations where there's nothing easy about it at all. I mean, and there's two requirements to win any battle. And it doesn't matter whether it's a military battle or a political battle or in terms of what we're talking about right here. You have to have the will, which is always the greatest test, and capability. And the capability comes from the international community, which is fueled by will. Again, will is part of education, understanding why the motivation to intervene has to be clearly accepted and internalized, and then, as Dylan said, operationalized. I really liked his term around the operationalization of this particular program, because that's where it happens or it doesn't happen.
Can I say one other thing about that? I think there's two additional factors as well that can't be underestimated. In the Libya case, I know something that played a really strongly in New York was pretty much the entire Libyan mission in New York defected at the start of the uprising. And so you actually had the ambassador and senior figures from the Libyan regime saying, we know this regime. We know what he's going to do if he gets to Benghazi. And they were literally inside the Security Council saying this to people who were about to vote on it. So they were advocating in favor of the no-fly zone and in favor of intervention. That really swayed a number of people inside the Security Council in terms of the way that they voted. Compare that to the situation with Syria. Assad has really learned a lot from looking at these other situations. And one of the things he's done is he recalled diplomats' families from their postings. Not the diplomats, their families. So the families of these guys are back in Damascus and Aleppo and these other cities, right? They're essentially hostage. So if these guys defect, they defect knowing that their families are back in Syria. So imagine the pressure that puts on these people around the world. As a result, from my own perspective, it's why we've seen surprisingly few major defections by Syrian diplomats around the world. As compared to in maybe the first week or so of the Libyan uprising, you know, there were a number of ambassadors, not just at the UN, but elsewhere in the world who defected. Second point I wanted to make is about intent. Another major blunder by Gaddafi. He came out and spoke his mind. He said, if I get to Benghazi, there's going to be rivers of blood. I'm going to go door to door. We're going to cleanse Benghazi. He called them rats and cockroaches particularly powerful because it evokes, of course, the language of the Rwandan genocide, which was something that was spoken about at the time. Whereas if you look at Assad and Assad's language, now he's doing things worse than what Gaddafi was, just as bad, if not worse, in terms of the scale of what he was doing. But he talks about reform. He talks about fighting terrorism, you know, which fits in very nicely with what a lot of other countries say is, language that people can relate to. We're fighting terrorism. I'm interested in reform. I want to, bring peace to the situation and so forth. So the case against him is in some ways much harder to make in the diplomatic sphere because of that. Although the reality is, of course, nobody in the world, I think, doubts that crimes against humanity are happening in Syria. So, yeah, just wanted to make that point.
I remember when the Rwanda genocide was going on, and I also remember very specifically Clinton was president then, and after he was no longer president, he went over there and visited and apologized publicly and straight out. And I expect he felt like crying at that time, and he should have. I guess I would like to take any president or powerful person in the world, and the one we have now, because he's here and he's now, and rub his face in the Clinton story and say, do you want to be that way? Do you want to feel what he felt when he did nothing? Is there something you can do? And we have political power. We have representatives that will scream in the Congress at the president, at the... Is this silly? Is this just simple? You guys are educating me because you're talking about all kinds of political things and all kinds of factors that go into this, and there are intelligent people in the world trying to put these factors together in sort of a jigsaw puzzle to get stuff happening. And I'm saying sort of the opposite, and I realize that's probably naive. But is there something that we can yell at our president about doing?
I was going to ask that too, sort of what can we do?
Thank you.
Please let me answer that question. Please let me answer that question, because there's two things I want to say. One is I mentioned very quickly. I had the dubious privilege of working in Rwanda after the genocide, and it's something that certainly really sticks with me and informs a lot of the work that I do. And I happened to be at a school on the outskirts of Kigali, which is quite famous. It was a school where the Belgian peacekeepers were when they abandoned the school. They made a movie about it called Shooting Dogs. The Belgian peacekeepers abandoned and left about 2,000 men, women, and children in the school, and they were all killed. And I happened to be there on the day they exhumed the mass grave. And one of the things was when they were pulling bodies out of the grave, I remember that, and I'll remember this to the day I die, which was a woman's dress, a young woman, because I could tell from the dress, a very brightly colored kind of dress, and it kind of really just, of all the horrible things, it was the one thing, it's strange, I'm sure you've had this experience, little things stick with you. It's the one thing that just really stuck with me, and what stuck with me about that was a dress, there was obviously a skeleton in it, but it was a dress belonging to a young woman, and I thought, I wonder what happened on the morning of the 11th of April 1994 at about 8 o'clock in the morning when the gates went open and the peacekeepers went out the door and the Interahamwe came in the other way with the machetes. Did she sit there and think, gee, I hope nobody violates my national sovereignty? Or did she think, where is the world? And why is nobody here to help me and to protect me? And I think that is the basis of R2P, and it's certainly something that stays with me. But what I also wanted to say is, the second part of what Clinton said in his speech is really, really important. He said, for once he didn't try and dodge a question with a mealy-mouthed apology. He actually gave a real apology. It's a very good apology. And one of the things he said is, if I look back on that period, though, from April to July of 1994, I don't remember anybody in the government knocking on my door and saying, this is huge, this requires action. I don't remember picking up the New York Times or the Washington Post and seeing column print, of editorials calling for things. I don't remember congressmen coming to me and saying, my constituents are up in arms because there's this genocide happening in Rwanda, and they're saying, why aren't we doing anything about it? So he said, so yes, I take responsibility, but I didn't have people, it wasn't like there was a whole momentum going in one direction and I was holding it back. So what's the lesson of that? The lesson of that is very, very obvious, is create the noise, create the feeling out there with your representatives in your communities and so forth, where if you care about these issues, then be active around these issues and raise your voice around them, and you'd be amazed, actually, because people do listen and they do hear. It's not going to fix everything, but it actually can make a real difference.
Yeah, definitely. I think Around this, we really need the communities to start somewhere, education. To educate about the issues, know a story that will let you where to start. When you start with your family, your friends, and also learn more about it, and then you will start contacting your senators, our President Obama, or the world leaders, or send letters to the United Nations or to International Criminal Court, because that's really will help. And you know, it's like if there is anyone has an office and in their table is clean, there is nothing. So then they will say, look, there is nothing coming in my office. There is no noise outside there. There is no media coverage. So why I'm giving myself more work? But we the people have the power. If we put the letters, we do rallies, and we have a lot of big media attention, and just keep continuous doing, that definitely they will do something about it. We know that the freedom is not easy. It will be a lot of up and down and challenges, but we have to be patient and we have to work on it until we will accomplish our goal. And thank you. Anybody wanna?
There's a lady at the back there.
Question at the back, yeah.
I'm not sure if I'll be able to ask this correctly, but my concern is about the, after 50, 60 years of the role of the United Nations, it seems to have really diminished. I kind of admire Kofi Annan, and I was just really surprised, naively maybe, that the Syrian president has ignored the United Nations and Kofi Annan, and it seems to happen an awful lot in Iraq, Afghanistan, I mean, you name it. The UN has lost a lot of influence and power, and I just feel very discouraged by it. So, and then also, you know, they, in Haiti, the UN forces that they chose to go in there infected with cholera the Haitian people. So that really discredits the United Nations. And I used to be a member of the local or the statewide UN, kind of opt out, because I felt that the UN has become so ineffective. So I was wondering if there's anybody up on the panel that can talk a little bit about how the United Nations can be re-empowered, or why is it they're being so ignored?
Check the mic, man.
Let me just be really clear again. I don't work for the United Nations. I work with the United Nations, and I guess my job is to make the United Nations better in its ability to respond to these issues. And I think it is a case of we make progress in some areas and we suffer defeats in others. And I think no issue has kept me awake more in the last 12 months than Syria, for example. And so certainly, I've gone to bed frustrated a lot of nights, trying to think about what we can do next and how we can rally the troops the next day and start doing, advocacy work, or how we can try and support solutions which try and deal with the situation in Syria. But I think at the end of the day, we also have to recognize, the UN's only as good as the members on the Security Council and the political will of particularly the P5, who really have a disproportionate say still. And I think, there's a lot of talk about United Nations reform, but the reality of the situation is the Security Council is an anachronistic structure, and its current the way it's constructed at the moment with the veto for the P5, and we could probably debate all evening, what a better structure might look like. I have my own version. I won't bore you with, but we can talk about that later on if you like. But I think, don't be pessimistic. I think, again, go back to what happened around these issues. 2005, 192 countries in the world said, we actually believe in this thing called the responsibility to protect, and we want action around it. we might not be able to get them to live up to it in, to the extent that we want in all cases, but I think that's a massive step forward. And even when, on the 4th of February, there was the double veto in the Security Council around the Syrian issue, a couple of things. First of all, 13 votes to 2, and who were the 2 votes? Second thing, not so widely reported in the media at the time, was there'd been a resolution in the General Assembly about a week or so beforehand in which I think the vote was 138 to 12 around, more comprehensive action against the Syrian regime. So there is, it's not just a case of nothing's happening and it's all terrible because people are getting killed in Syria. I think there's a groundswell of people in the world, but also hopefully of governments in the world who are kind of grappling for solutions in Syria and elsewhere while using these kind of clumsy tools which were built out of the Second World War, those tools being the structures of the UN itself. I don't know if you want to have a crack at that.
Well, I can tell you, the military shares your cynical view of the useless nations, and that's what it was referred to many times in some of the professional military education. Yeah, sorry about that. The military shares your somewhat cynical view of the UN, okay? And in many of the schools that I've attended, out of that frustration to being the pointy end of the spear, all the time, in many cases for us, the term useless nations is often used synonymously with the UN because it's just such a cumbersome, ineffective, body oftentimes that we like to see it better, from our selfish perspective. I believe that the way to do that, and I know that I'm an idealistic, and I believe that America is an alabaster city on the hill, needs to be more of a leader. I do. You don't agree with me? I think that we have a responsibility to lead, and use our economic, diplomatic, informational, military, national powers to help some of these situations. And we've learned that when we do that, others will join us and follow and make things better that way. But the system itself is only going to be so perfect given the challenges of so many different bodies being a part of that and the construct that you have. You just can't wave a magic wand or sprinkle fairy dust on it and make it work better.
I'm going to jump in here. Something that I always tell my students when I'm introducing the UN to them is that, and many of you may have heard this before, but the way to think about the UN is it's the table. It's the table where the countries can come around and talk. You can't get mad at the table for failing. The table is a table. It can't fail.
Right.
It's an inanimate object. It's a table. So
I like
it's the
that.
people around the table that have the problems and that don't use the table for what it could be used for. They're not using the tools that they've been given. It is an old system. It came out of a time that is very different politically, and just the system that we live in today is very different. We've gone through some changes, but it's still the table that we have. So you can't get mad at the table. That just wastes your energy and your anger. Get mad at the people around the table and use your energy to try and change how they use their place at that table. That's just a really simple way that I try to explain it to my students, because they come to class with those same frustrations every day. And so I just wanted to make sure you're all aware of the table analogy.
That's a good one. I like
I'm
that.
totally stealing that.
Me too. I just wrote it down.
I got
It's right
that
here.
in grad school. I had an amazing
Table.
professor who
Don't
was
be mad at the table.
Pakistani ambassador, and he explained that to me and to my class. And so, Ahmad Kamal, wherever you are out there, thank you very much. But sorry to jump in.
Clarity, you're not talking about this table, right?
This table
Don't
is
be
not
mad
the
at this
problem. The
table.
table has 193 seats, but in some ways maybe just 5 permanent ones. There's a table within a table, and just don't get mad at the table. So I'll let the audience back at the panel. Any other questions for our panel while I'm up here?
Well, I do, actually.
Yeah.
I would like to know why the United States refuses to become a member of the International Court.
Let's talk after, because that is a massive
Can't
question.
answer it now. We have media here.
Anyone want to take
Well, it
that
should.
briefly? Yeah.
It
definitely
should. I mean, the United States is the only country in the world to ratify and then unratify the membership of the ICC. Of course, it joined the ICC on literally the last day it possibly could, and then under the previous administration, it took its signature off that. But the United States should be a member of the ICC. There's absolutely no doubt. If we believe in international justice, if we believe in all these things that we talk about, then the world needs the United States to be a member of the International Criminal Court. Having said that, I think some progress is being made. So, for example, U.S. advisors, military advisors right now in Central Africa are attempting to arrest Joseph Kony, right? What are they going to do with him if they catch him? He's going to go to the ICC, absolutely. And Americans will hand him over to go to the ICC. I'm confident of that. And that would be a step forward. You think they should join the ICC, don't you? Come on. Come on, Colonel.
I think
The people demand it.
people demand. I am not schooled enough really to respond to that. My initial take on it is that America doesn't want to be a part of that because we want to maintain our own system of justice within our own. For example, if you had a soldier overseas who commits an atrocity, for example, we want, as a country, to be able to deal with that directly within our own system, within our Universal Code of Military Justice, and not be held accountable or by the ICC, looking at that individual and taking them out of the jurisdiction of the soldier's host country. That might be a reason, I don't know, but I'd like to read more about that and maybe discuss that over dinner too, so I can learn more about it.
Being a member of the ICC doesn't mean that happens, but but also, I think just because this is about R2P, and we recently hosted a meeting with the ICC prosecutor-elect Fatou Bensouda, who I think is going to do great things at the ICC. And I was very, happy and proud when she said that she sees the ICC as the legal arm of R2P. And certainly the struggle against impunity and the struggle for accountability is an essential part of what we talk about when we talk about the responsibility to protect.
Any other questions? Yeah.
The involvement of United States to enhance development in Central Africa, isn't that fall within the interest things? Because in March when this policy will come out in this year, and around that time actually there was also discovery of oil in Uganda. So the Ugandan, those people in Uganda, they say, right now we don't even see any problem with corn. Corn is no longer within the Uganda area. So corn is way somewhere far, and it's not effective. It's not doing anything right now. So why these things like booming and like popping up? So it seems like it's something related to the oil kind of stuff. So this will go back to the interest. Because if we look at corn and what's happening in Sudan and what's happening in Syria, so I don't see the value there on how it's going to be like more effective than what is going on in the Sudan government and the South Sudan and what's going on in Syria.
I just want to add to that. The decision to send 100 U.S. personnel to Uganda was back in October, and the Comey video came out in March. So the U.S. Probably not in its usual ways of acting on interest. Possibly, you're thinking about the oil. They sent that way before that was discovered. So.
Look, I think there's a kind of a trope that's used often in progressive circles about there must be some secret, conspiracy around any of these issues that explains it. I think we just sometimes have to be careful about that. And I can remember it coming up a lot in the Libyan case. Libya has oil, right? So the reason why the world intervened in Libya was because of the oil. I don't believe that to be true. I believe it's for the reasons that that happened. And in fact, if they did intervene for the oil, then they did a really bad job of it, because the price of oil shot up the second that the intervention started to happen over concerns about scarcity of oil. So I just think we just have to guard against that a little bit. And the other thing is, nations can have interests which are not necessarily counterposed to broader humanitarian goals. And that can happen. It's a crazy idea. But sometimes, that absolutely can happen. And I just think we just have to be careful about that. An imperfect answer, I'm sorry. But.
I think about Joseph Kony, he's a dictator, and he did terrible things to the girls and boys by the age of whatever is 5, 6, just take them. And Joseph Kony, he's not in Uganda, but he's between Central Africa, Uganda, Kenya, and you come to South Sudan, you come up to South Kordofan and go to Darfur. And it's like 3 days ago, they go to border, which one is in South Darfur, and they really, they're working with the government of Sudan, because who funding Joseph Kony is Omar al-Bashir, because he's a dictator. And Joseph Kony, he just want to have a power that will go attack all these refugee camps and take as much kids, he take them, and just turn them to the military and do with the girls whatever he want to do. If you want to escape, cut your legs, cut your hands, cut your nose, cut your ears. He's saying that he's sending a message. He's sending a message to others. If you really want to escape, your result will be even worse. So, and United States to send these 100, those are experts, those to go and work with those neighbors country, and neighbors country will bring more troops, and they will be working with them together how to get this guy, to the International Criminal Court. And that is really is amazing, is very powerful, because when Joseph Kony, they take him to the International Criminal Court, that is really will solve a lot of problems in neighbors country. You have Central Africa, you have Uganda, you have Nairobi, you have Ethiopia, you have South Sudan, South Kordofan, and even Darfur. That is really even to kind of, because he's helping al-Bashir a lot. So that also will be for al-Bashir. We want to get him, and we want to get al-Bashir as well, because those are two criminals, and they kind of working in this crime together, crime against humanity and genocide and all the other stuff. And it's really, I'm so glad when I hear that United States, they're sending a special, that military to go and move every single day one step. And George Clooney and John Pendergast, they're putting that satellite project that will kind of take a look at it, that guy, and tell them where this guy is, where he's somewhere there, and they just want to catch him. And this is really amazing for me, just to follow and just learn more about, and until they will get arrested. Thanks.
Well, with that, it is 7:30, right on time. We do have to be out of the building fairly soon, but any concluding remarks from any of the panelists?
I just wanted to say one thing, which is, there was a question before about what do you do and all those sorts of things, and as I guess the only person here who's representing a kind of a NGO-y like organization, I do have an account on Twitter, and I tweet inappropriate stuff from inside UN meetings from time to time, and we have a Facebook page, and we also have on the website, we have a publication we put out called R2P Monitor, which is for UN diplomats and government officials around the world, but it's open to anybody who can subscribe to it. And it looks at different situations around the world and provides a background, and also has policy recommendations and so forth. So if you're interested, I would recommend you to go. That's one way of keeping informed about these sorts of issues. And we always try on our Facebook feed and on my Twitter account and stuff to let people know if other things are going on that they can get involved with as well. So that's my little commercial plug. And thank you all for, I think on behalf of all of us, thank you guys for all coming out on a rainy, foggy kind of Maine night. Is it always like this in Maine?
No.
No, thank you so much to our panel. As someone who has been interested in this kind of issue, this is huge to have these homegrown experts, but also for Simon to come up and join us from New York. We're incredibly lucky. So you can stick around. Please grab food at the back, clear it out. We can mingle for a few minutes. Our guests can get up and stretch their legs. They've been sitting for far too long. And you can interact with them, and we'll be around for about 15, 20 minutes.
Thank you, Simon.
No, that was great. Well done. So you're still in the military?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. That was great. Thank you for sharing your story. It's an amazing story. Well done, Ryan.